Wide Angle with Karen Coleman on News Talk 106 to 108.
Ivana Bacik, not great news now, I'm afraid, for yourself, because this poll in the Sunday Independent, they have also polled people's preferences for both this Dublin Central and Dublin South by-election. George Lee way ahead in that poll there for Dublin South, and also Paschal Donohoe for Dublin Central, which is the constituency. You come second, mind you, but Paschal Donohoe so far is ahead of you for the Dublin Central by-election in that poll.
Yes, thanks, Karen. It's an interesting poll, but in fact I'm rather pleased to see how well I'm doing. I've been selected as a candidate just last Tuesday, so I'm less than a week declared in the field, and I'm very grateful to the members of Dublin Central Labour Party for selecting me. But given how short a time I've been in the field, and I note the poll was taken on Friday, I'm delighted to see I'm on 20%. You know, I mean, I think that's testament to the strong base Labour have in the constituency. I've been out canvassing as much as I have been able to in the few days since I've been selected, and we're getting a very positive response on doorsteps. And Joe Costello, I must say, has an enormous well of support in Dublin Central, and the local candidates are strong. So I would be optimistic about it. I think also one has to look at both polls in the light of the timing. As I say, they were taken on Friday. Clearly the George Lee bounce, if we can call it that, was a factor for both. I think, you know, looking at the stories that are dominant in the papers about the by-elections, Dublin Central is sort of relegated very much down.
Yes, Dublin South has taken over.
Clearly it has. The George Lee story is enormous. And yet, you know, I think that will die down over the days ahead.
To be honest with you, Ivana, I don't think it will die down. I think George Lee's entrance into Irish politics has really added some sparkle of dynamism to the whole thing, and I think actually you'll find that he will probably will be responsible for bringing a substantial bounce to Fine Gael, which will last well beyond June 5th.
Yes, I think he will bring a bounce. I think you're absolutely right about that, but I don't think the level of publicity and I suppose media's focus on him could be sustained at the level it is currently over the 4 weeks ahead. So I suppose what I'm saying is I think the focus will shift a little away from him and more towards the field generally in both by-elections. But it's understandable at the moment that the focus is almost entirely and exclusively on him, and that has a big bearing on the polls. But certainly I think in Dublin Central it's all to play for, you know.
And in Dublin South it also says that Alex White, of course, and you would have to feel sorry for Alex White, the Labour candidate there, because he was nominated by Labour weeks ago and he's been pounding the pavements trying to get his constituent votes. But it also shows here in this poll today taken by the Sunday Independent that George Lee is now at 49% in terms of popularity, while Alex White is only at 12%.
Well,
so George Lee certainly seems to be running ahead if you take this poll as an indication.
Yeah, as I say, I think it's a question of timing, and I do think that in the days and the 4 weeks ahead that, you know, that will level out a little, because I don't see it as being a foregone conclusion in Dublin South either. And I think the George Lee bounce certainly is a big factor at the moment. But I think, you know, there's a lot of transfers around there still, and I think Alex White is still very much in the game there.
Gerald Keane, what do you make of this story and also George Lee now moving into politics?
Well, I think first of all, there's so many people in this country that are disillusioned by the political system as it exists at the moment, and not only in the main part, obviously Fianna Fáil, but also there's not a huge amount of confidence, I believe, out there in the opposition parties. So therefore, my feeling from talking to people is that they're absolutely delighted to have somebody like George Lee come on, because they actually see him as a change in himself. And here's somebody that might be different, and here's somebody that might give us some hope. But like, no disrespect, I mean, I think that the fact that Fianna Fáil are polling so badly is absolutely no surprise to anybody, with wonderful ideas of cervical cancer vaccines being withdrawn and old age pension cards, and let's hit the special needs teachers and hit the nurses and frontline workers. So that doesn't surprise me. But at the same time, I must say I'm not overly confident about, you know, the opposition either. So I think that what happens is that you find that somebody like George Lee comes on and we're all excited and we're all delighted, and I think that his bounce will probably last a little bit longer than Ivana might say. I do agree with you. I think Alex White, like Ivana, are great workers and great people who I think, you know, genuinely are, because they put their heart and soul into it. And I do feel sorry for Alex White, because I think he'll be whitewashed by George Lee, but that's because of a perceptive, you know, we have this perception of a big change with him. Unfortunately, again, I believe that as soon as Fine Gael, as I probably believe will be in power the next election, and George Lee, I think, will probably be a minister on the front bench, I think that what happens, he gets soaked into the system again, and we'll all fall back into the same mess.
Because, I
in
mean,
some form
That's
or
a
another.
very cynical view.
It is,
Jared.
yeah, because
I think one has to be more
Yeah.
optimistic than that. I think if you look at opinion poll figures, you see Eamon Gilmore has got an enormous level of public confidence in his leadership, as leader of the Labour Party. I mean, way above Enda Kenny's leadership,
Yes, I agree.
the trust in Enda Kenny's leadership nationally. So I do think that is going to count for a lot with people who are looking, as you say, for a real alternative to the washed-out policies of this government.
I think it's a fair point. I do think Eamon Gilmore speaks very well. But I'm just wondering, would you not agree with me that what is required is a statement of fundamental change? The problem is that when I hear representatives of the Labour Party and Fine Gael talking, they're saying everything that will try not to lose them a vote. I mean, I listened to Joan Burton, for example. If you ask Joan, will you make redundancies in certain areas of the public service sector, where it's clear to everybody, not no criticism of the individuals themselves, but it's fundamentally wrong. The answer is, well, we have to look at that. We have to talk to our social partners. The last thing we need to do, they're afraid to come out and commit. Where I prefer somebody to come up and say, listen, I'm going to lay off. I'm going to make sure that 5,000 unused administrative workers in the HSE are going to be let go. I know you may lose 5,000 votes plus the immediate family, but you might get a much larger vote of confidence, say, there's change. And that's why I've been outspoken for this fellow John McGuinness, who I only met once in my life. And I'm not a Fianna Fáil supporter, not like anybody. But I was on the paper programme here one day, reading about John McGuinness front page, talking about doing this and that. I said, I think they got that wrong. He's obviously Fine Gael.
Jared, Fianna Fáil are very good at presenting an opposition from within. And I would see John, and I think we all can fall into the trap of really taking at face value what their dissenters internally say. But I would just be cautious about that. I think John McGuinness and others are very much still part of the Fianna Fáil gene pool.
I do agree, but he was
very much part of that tribal loyalty to
I know
Fianna
what you mean,
Fáil.
yeah.
That really is what has left Fianna Fáil in power.
It cost him his job. He did it as a kind of junior minister, with all due respect.
I think he was going to lose his job anyway. I don't think
he's going to lose it because he's spoken out.
They had to cull the junior ministers anyway. Let's not forget that, and they culled others who'd been loyal. So I'm not sure about that either. But I think we just have to be careful about the.
But you wouldn't admire his honesty, would you? I mean, he came out and he said, "I'm going to do 1, 2. I think the government are failing because they should do 1, 2, 3 and 4."
Well, I agree with many of his criticisms, but I just have distrust for those within Fianna Fáil. I've seen it too many times. Fianna Fáilers who present themselves as members of the opposition and yet then row in with the government in terms of.
And you're saying Labour and Fine Gael never do that? No?
I think Labour are presenting a real alternative, and I think Joan Burton, to be fair to her, has presented a very strong challenge to Minister Brian Lenihan. And don't forget, Labour voted against the bank guarantee scheme, a vote which I think in retrospect seems as right.
But I think Gerald's point about Batchick about not coming out straight about what they would do with the public sector is a very interesting one. You see, Labour will be too afraid to take on the trade unions and the public sector. In reality,
I don't accept that. And I think there's a lot of support within Labour for the measures about efficiency. Eamon Gilmore has said he supports, for example, the idea of a pension levy, not the way in which it was imposed, certainly, and it should have been imposed in a much more equitable way. And I think most people would agree with that the lowest paid public sector workers shouldn't have been hit as they have been. But I think the idea of it was supported. And I think also there's been support for the idea of I think it's a wonderful idea, career breaks and leave of absence for public servants. I'm taking that myself. I think that's very important.
That's only prolonging the illness, actually. I mean, they need to be able to take it on board and be able to say, look, this is what we need to do with the public sector. And certainly I think Gerald is making a good point. Labour have been faffing around here because, of course, it goes against their very policies to actually say, listen, we need to do something radical here and take on the trade unions and reduce the size of the public sector.
I think it's a clever spin. Just finish on that point, Karen. I think it's an important point to make that it was Fianna Fáil in government who kept negotiating wage increases and social partnership, and they've sort of very cleverly spun it to suggest that it was the opposition somehow. And yet they were the ones who didn't see the economic collapse coming, if you like, and kept negotiating. Sorry,
it's a good thing. It's a good thing us doctors are trained to be good listeners. That's all I have to say. I think we have two different problems going on in our political system right now. We have acute problems and chronic problems. The acute problems stem from the level of competence of this government. I think it is grotesquely incompetent. I think all of the serious commentators have pointed out that they mismanaged the economy during the boom and they're mismanaging the economy during the bust. I think the bust is clearly largely due to international factors, somewhat outside their control, but there's no doubt we're having it worse. We're getting a harder landing than we should have had because of failure to plan during the good times. I think for that reason, it's good news that there appears to be a greater momentum right now towards a change of government than would have seemed possible at the time of an election in 2007, which gave them such an entrenched majority. One hopes that the electoral shakeout over the next year or two will allow something to happen which makes this Dáil not reach its full term and that we do actually get a chance to change the people who are running the country.
The Wide Angle with Karen Coleman on News Talk 106 to 108.